think there's a certain fascination in why a place is abandoned in the first place, because it's not really normal for a building to be abandoned. I mean, when plans are first drawn up to build a building, no one actually ever thinks that it's going to be abandoned. People presume it's going to be used forever. So when you have an abandoned place, it seems like such a waste of a building. It's fascinating in a way that a city like Berlin can just afford to have this huge area totally desolate and totally wrecked. So you have this fascination on the one hand with how a building is abandoned or why it's abandoned, and there's almost always like a tragic story or a sad story behind it as well. And when you see an abandoned place, you always have to wonder about the story behind it, and I think the fascination comes from that. When I see a fence and it says, betreten verboten, or, trespassing forbidden, it's almost like an invitation. You have to accept it, and you have just this burning curiosity to go over the fence and see what it is that you're not supposed to see. But I think for abandoned places in particular in Berlin, it's just that Berlin is so full of history, and it's had such a traumatic past that it has created all these places all over the city and all around, especially in East Germany. Because after the wall came down, then a lot of businesses were left and abandoned or sold off or closed down. So it had created all these buildings that are no longer in use. So there was just this huge amount of material there, so many stories to tell. And I just kind of landed by accident in the right place to tell them or to discover them or whatever. And now I feel it's kind of it's almost like a mission now to tell those stories. Well, it started when I was kind of overcome by curiosity, when I was outside the former fairground park, Spray Park in East Berlin. And I just climbed the fence one day when I got enough courage. And when I went in, I was just amazed at what I found, because it was incredible. There were fallen dinosaurs, there was a Ferris wheel, this roller coaster, and for me it felt like such a shame to have this magical place in the edge of, or pretty near the center of the city, but nobody seemed to know about it. So when I got home, I decided I would write about it straight away, and as I was writing about it, I looked up the history, and I found it had a crazy story as well, involving drug smuggling and just crazy stuff. You couldn't make it up. So I wrote it all together on my own kind of personal blog and published a little guide so other people could find it, and put a little map for people to find it on. So now it's turned into a sort of a documentation project that I need to go to these places while they're still, before they're reclaimed or restored or knocked down altogether, take photos of them in their state and write about their stories then as well. There are always clues in abandoned places from their past, and in that way they explain their stories. So when you go into even, an empty room, there may be a chair in the corner, and you may find like I found once a soldier's jacket on the back of a chair in an old Russian barracks. So obviously it was a clue to the past that, one stage or other there were Soviet soldiers here. So I think when you have abandoned places, even though the people have left, there are always items that they have left behind, which give clues to the past, which tell a bit about the story or try and tell the story. Story is never really complete because I guess, items on their own can't really tell the story, but that adds to the sense of mystery involved. Does the city care for its past? Politicians will tell you, of course we do, and of course we care for the past. This is a hard question to answer. Especially in Germany, you have this, because of the bad history, there is this, I guess, a sort of an understandable urge to cover up the past and not to just kind of try and forget all the terrible stuff that happened. So you have like former sites associated with the Nazis which are just left to rot in the woods. No effort is made to preserve them at all, and I think that most people would prefer that they just disappeared without a trace forever. There are lots of examples of the city prioritizing investors over historical objects, things that should be preserved or things that are linked to the past, which would perhaps remind people of mistakes that should not be made again. In that respect, I think, Berlin is not very... It gives too much priority to money over history. In many cases, for investors, it's much cheaper to knock down a building or wait for it to fall down and then rebuild a brand new building. And for me, that, it doesn't make much sense. I mean, historically, it's obviously a waste of a building to have it just abandoned and rotting in the woods. It was actually one of the reasons why I decided to publicize locations, was because I felt, at least if people come along and they can take photos there and do what they want, it's not so much of a waste. In my own personal, selfish way, I'd love for all abandoned buildings to stay abandoned forever and to remain this kind of lonely, mystical places. But I mean, you have to be practical about it as well. And I think unless, if nothing is done with them, they're all just going to fall to the ground and vanish anyway. The forest will reclaim them, or nature will slowly reclaim it. So I think, an effort has to be made to kind of somehow preserve them in a way which honors their past, or which doesn't really take away from their past, so that the stories aren't lost. So it sounds a bit, maybe it's not even possible to restore buildings in such a way that their stories aren't forgotten, but I think some element of preservation is required. No way around really restoring a building without losing some of its magic, because obviously some of the magic comes from this, comes from the cobwebs, it comes from the flaking paint on the walls, and it comes from, just the decay isn't itself attractive in buildings. So when you take that away, obviously it loses some of its magic. But I still think that, historical buildings can be restored in such a way so as to at least kind of preserve a bit of what, some part of their historical past. personally, I think that abandoned buildings, each abandoned place has its own message and or its own story, its own very personal, particular story. Altogether, I mean, you have to look at a place like Berlin, East Germany, and wonder why there are so many abandoned places. And I think the message from that is that, you know, people made mistakes, huge mistakes, and were just wasteful with, you know, they closed down factories, they closed down businesses after the wall came down, and it was just a huge waste of resources. So I think abandoned buildings in general, the main message when you take them all together is that people are very wasteful and should maybe learn to be a bit more careful with what they have and maybe, you know, treat their buildings a little better. That's about it. I just think a lot of mistakes were made, and many of these abandoned places are the result of those mistakes.